The child was too cold to cry anymore. Mercy had wrapped him in everything she owned, shawl, apron, even the last strip of her petticoat. But still his lips were gray, and his eyelids fluttered like paper in the wind. Snow beat against her back as she stumbled down the ridge, the trees thinning around her, her boots soaked through and her legs shaking. The wind screamed like it had teeth, and she couldn't tell if the dark shape ahead was a rock or a hut, or just another trick of the cold. Then a flicker. Orange, steady, firelight. Real. Not imagined. She dropped to her knees just as the world opened into a small clearing, and saw him. A tall figure crouched beside a fire, his back straight, his hair tied with leather, the red glow dancing across brown skin and braids. An Apache. She wanted to scream, to run, to shield her son, but there was no strength left, only bones and breath and the heat of desperation. She crawled forward, clutching Caleb to her chest, until she was just a few feet from the fire. The man looked up. His face was unreadable, stone and smoke, but his hands never left the pot balanced above the flame. Steam rose, fragrant and warm, her vision blurred, not from fear, but from hunger. Mercy lowered her son to the ground, then collapsed beside him, hands up, shaking like leaves. She coughed, tasted blood, then whispered, "Please feed the child first. You can beat me after." Her words were nearly stolen by the wind, but he heard. She saw it in the flicker of his eyes. Not shock, not anger, just stillness. For a moment, she thought he hadn't understood. Then he turned back to the fire. Without a word, he reached into the pot with a carved wooden ladle and stirred. Slowly. Intentionally. He broke a piece of soft flatbread in half, laid it on a rock to warm, then ladled broth into a small clay bowl. When it was full, he stood, not quickly, not with threat, and crossed to the boy. Mercy stiffened, shielding her child, but the man only knelt. He set the bowl near Caleb's lips, lifted the child's head with one hand, and gently began feeding him, drop by drop. The boy swallowed. Mercy choked on a sob. She buried her face in the dirt, ashamed, grateful, terrified. "I didn't steal him," she gasped. "He's mine. I swear it. I just wanted him to live." The man said nothing. He returned to the fire, poured another bowl, and brought it back, this time setting it beside her. Then he went back again, as calm as if this were the most natural thing in the world, and tore the bread into strips. By the time Mercy could lift her head, he had already placed a second blanket near the flames, unrolled a fur beside it, and was stoking the fire higher with cedar branches. She didn't know what to do. Her body ached for the warmth, but her heart still braced for punishment, for accusation, for any word at all. But he gave her none. Only food, only fire, only silence. Mercy gathered her son in trembling arms and edged closer to the blanket. Caleb whimpered, then fell asleep with a piece of bread still in his fist. She watched the Apache as he sat, legs crossed, back to the wind, gaze steady on the flame. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. He didn't answer, but he reached for another bowl and began to cook again. Morning came slowly, crawling over the frozen world like a hesitant child, unsure if it was safe to show its face. The fire had died to embers, but the warmth still clung to the ground where Mercy lay curled around her son. Caleb stirred against her chest, fever still faint on his skin, but breathing steady. She dared not move at first, afraid the man who'd saved them would be gone, or worse, that he'd never meant to help at all. But when she lifted her head, he was still there, seated beside the rebuilt fire with his back to her, feeding fresh wood into the flames as though he'd been doing it all night. She sat up slowly, bones aching, fingers numb despite the shelter. The blanket beneath her was not her own. It was thick, soft, and smelled of smoke and cedar. She looked around, taking in the small clearing more clearly now. 3 poles stood in a tripod over the fire. A pot, blackened with years of use, swung from the top. Nearby, a bundle of herbs hung drying beneath an animal hide stretched between branches. It wasn't a camp. It was a home, simple, seasonal, but lived in, and she was in the center of it. The man turned, meeting her gaze. His face was young, but lined by sun and wind. His eyes were dark, not cruel, but unreadable, like the surface of a still lake hiding stories beneath. Mercy opened her mouth to thank him, but words felt too small. Instead, she gestured to the child. He's breathing better, she managed. Thank you. No response, only the crack of kindling. She tried again. I don't know your name. Mine's Mercy. My boy is Caleb. He blinked once, but said nothing. He rose, slow and silent, and walked to the herb bundle. From a pouch hanging near it, he pulled a folded piece of cloth and opened it to reveal dried flowers. Tiny, purple, fragrant. He dropped a pinch into a mug, poured hot water from the pot, and brought it to her. She accepted it with both hands. Is this safe? He nodded once. She took a sip. The warmth slid through her like sunlight under the skin. Her throat eased, her limbs loosened. Caleb stirred again. I thought we were going to die out there, she whispered. We lost the trail 3 nights ago. The storm. Her voice caught. I didn't think anyone would help us, not out here, not after... She trailed off. The man sat again, across from her. Still no words. But no distance either. Mercy watched him, watched how he moved, quiet, precise, with a kind of discipline that felt sacred. He didn't stare at her. He didn't question. He simply existed beside her like a stone that had always been there. Why didn't you beat me? She asked, suddenly, surprising herself. I've known men who would have. For trespassing, for begging, for breathing too loud. He didn't look away. Then, finally, a single word left his mouth, deep and quiet. Talako. She blinked. Is that your name? He nodded. 1 word. That's all he gave. But in that word, in the stillness that followed, Mercy felt something shift, not in him, in herself. The man had taken her and her child into his fire, his silence, his space, and asked for nothing in return. Not even fear. Caleb moaned softly in his sleep, and Mercy tucked the blanket tighter around him. Talako rose again, this time pulling a flat stone from beneath the fur. He began slicing dried roots, preparing the next meal. Mercy watched him, then looked down at her own hands. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a place to be punished. Maybe it was the first place she didn't have to flinch. By midday, the wind had settled, and the sky had cleared to a pale, icy blue. The snow still blanketed the ground, but the storm no longer clawed at Mercy's skin. Caleb had eaten a full portion of broth Talako had stirred with those same slow, sacred movements, and then fallen back asleep with his cheek against Mercy's thigh. She didn't dare disturb him. She sat beside the fire, her back against a cold boulder, her fingers curled around the bone-handled spoon Talako had given her. Across from her, Talako worked in silence, mending a tear in a leather pouch, sewing it with sinew as easily as breathing. Mercy couldn't look away from his hands. There was no threat in them, no harshness, just discipline, precision, and strength that didn't need to shout to be known. Are we allowed to stay? She asked quietly. Her voice felt clumsy, too loud for the quiet between them. Talako didn't look up, but he gave a slow nod. It was enough. Mercy looked down at her son, then at her own shoes. torn at the toe, soaked and stiff. The last man she'd spoken to before the storm had laughed at her shoes. He'd said, "Looks like even the devil wouldn't bother chasing you, Mercy. You'd trip over yourself first." That had been hours before he threw her and Caleb off the wagon. She took a breath. "We didn't mean to trespass," she said. "I just followed the smell of smoke. I didn't know anyone still lived out here." Talico stood and poured more hot water into a second mug, dropping the same purple herbs inside. He brought it to her without a word. She accepted it carefully. "Talico," she said, trying the name again, softly. "Why are you helping us?" He sat back down, stirred the fire with a long stick. Then, without looking at her, he said, "You asked me to feed the child first." His voice was even, quiet, but there was weight in it. No one who says that deserves to be beaten. Mercy's eyes stung. She blinked fast, too fast. Most men I've known would have taken those words as an invitation. Talico didn't answer. But she saw his jaw tighten slightly. That, too, was an answer. "I thought kindness was something you had to earn," she whispered. "With obedience, or silence." Her voice dropped. "Or your body?" The silence stretched between them like a rope. Then Talico reached into the pouch he'd been mending and pulled out something small. He walked over and set it beside her gently. A single cedar branch, tied with a strip of hide. "What is it?" she asked. "It burns clean," he said. "No smoke, used in ceremonies, when you want to send up only truth." Mercy looked at the branch, then at him. "You're not just feeding us, are you?" He didn't move. "You're tending us." He didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. Later that afternoon, Talico began stacking stones in a circle around the fire, reinforcing it with precision. Mercy watched, then slowly rose and picked up a small rock to help. She walked over and placed it beside the others. Talico didn't stop her. He just nodded. And so she stayed beside him, stacking stones until the circle was complete. Not because she owed him, not because she feared him, but because it felt like the first fire she had ever been welcome to build. One that asked for no silence, one that burned without chains. That evening, Mercy didn't sit behind the fire. She sat beside it. Not as a beggar, not as a trespasser, but as something closer to a guest, though she still wasn't sure she deserved the word. Caleb lay wrapped in furs, his cheeks no longer ashen, his breathing even. Talico had given him a carved piece of antler to hold, and the boy clutched it like a treasure. Mercy stirred the pot while Talico shaved strips of dried meat into it. Her hands still trembled when she moved too fast. Her nerves didn't trust peace yet, but her bones were learning. "You don't speak much," she said, glancing at him. "That on purpose or just who you are?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "I speak when I must." She half laughed. "Seems to be working out better than most men I've known. They speak so much they forget to listen." Talico added a pinch of herbs to the pot, his eyes focused. "Words are not offerings," he said simply. "They're footprints. You don't leave too many unless you want to be followed." Mercy stared at him, caught off guard. "And here I was thinking you were quiet because you didn't like me." "I don't know you yet," he replied. Not cold, just honest. She respected that more than she expected to. "What do you want to know?" she asked, looking at the fire. "Where I came from? Who hurt me? What I've done?" "You already told me," he said. "When?" "When you said, 'Feed the child first.'" Mercy swallowed. That line had come from somewhere deeper than words, somewhere primal and exhausted. She hadn't even realized she'd said it until he handed her food. He stirred the pot again. Then dipped a spoon into the broth. He tasted it, adjusted the stones under the pot, then reached for 2 bowls. One he handed to her. The other he set aside for the boy. She took it in both hands, staring down at the steam. "This is the first hot meal I haven't paid for," she said. "With labor. Or with something else." Talako didn't look at her. "Then eat it slow. Let it last." She lifted the spoon, brought it to her lips, and tasted the broth. It was simple. Meat, herbs, root vegetables. But it flooded her chest like mercy itself. It made her eyes sting. "You're not feeding me because I'm useful to you," she whispered, "or because I'm yours. You're feeding me because I exist." Talako nodded once. "Even a bird eats, though it cannot plow." She looked up. "That's Apache teaching?" "Number that's just watching the world?" She smiled. "You might not talk much, Talako, but you say more in a sentence than most do in a sermon." He gave no reaction, but she thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but something just shy of warmth. As the fire crackled and the snow settled around the clearing like a sleeping animal, Mercy sat in the silence, spoon in hand, and let herself chew slowly, carefully, without apology, without fear. She watched Talako eat, his posture straight, his gaze resting on the flames as if they spoke a language only he understood. And for the first time in a long, long while, she realized she wasn't waiting for the other boot to drop. She wasn't bracing for violence. She wasn't earning her safety one spoonful at a time. She was simply eating, in peace, in silence, in the presence of a man who knew what offering meant. Not control, not pity, just fire and food and space. The snow melted slow but steady over the next 2 days, revealing patches of earth beneath the trees like wounds healing in reverse. Mercy spent most of that time near the fire, helping where she could, sorting herbs, cleaning pots, mending torn cloth with thread Shuya had shown her how to spin years ago. She was surprised her fingers still remembered. Caleb played quietly nearby, his energy returning in soft waves. He didn't speak much, but he watched Talako constantly, the way a dog watches a man who doesn't pretend. Mercy noticed. Talako noticed too, but said nothing, as always. That morning, she had gone to wash her hands at the edge of the creek beyond the camp. The water was still cold enough to sting, but she welcomed it. The sound, the solitude, it helped her breathe. She leaned over the water and caught her reflection, and flinched. The scar across her jaw, long faded but sharp in morning light, stared back at her, jagged and pale. She touched it gently, as if it had appeared overnight. She had stopped thinking about it long ago. When you never look in mirrors, forgetting is easy. But now, in the quiet, in the firelight, in the absence of cruelty, it suddenly mattered. Not because she thought it made her ugly, but because she didn't know what it meant anymore. When she returned to camp, Talako was cutting wood. He didn't glance up when she passed him. She wasn't sure why that bothered her. Later, as they sat by the fire, Caleb asleep in the blanket roll behind them, she finally spoke. "I forgot I had a scar," she said, not looking at him. "Saw it this morning in the creek." Talako said nothing. She wasn't sure if he hadn't heard or was waiting. "A man did it," she added, "with the buckle on his belt. Said I wasn't listening fast enough." Still silence, but not cold. She could feel his attention like sunlight, not blazing, just present. "You never looked at it," she said. "Most people do." Talako stirred the pot. Then, "It's not yours." She blinked. "What?" "That scar. It was someone else's act, not your doing, not your name." She felt her breath catch. "Then what is mine?" she asked. "The way you carry it," he said. "That's yours. She wanted to cry, but didn't. She'd done enough of that already. "My husband told me it made me more obedient," she whispered. "My son saw it happen. He doesn't remember, but I do. I always will." Talako handed her a pouch of dried sage. "Smoke takes what we name," he said. "You name it obedience. I say name it survival." She took the pouch. Her hands shook slightly. "Do you believe in forgiveness?" she asked. Talako leaned back slightly, looking into the fire. "Not in words, but in warmth." She looked at him now, fully. His eyes weren't soft. They were still, like a lake under moonlight, cold on the surface, but deep with something living. "You've forgiven someone," she said. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. That night, she sat with Caleb curled against her chest, and she tied her hair back with a strip of fabric cut from the hem of her own skirt, no longer to hide the scar, but to hold it in place. It had traveled long enough without a home. She caught Talako watching her, not with interest, but with understanding. And in that shared stillness, a truth formed. Not every wound needed to close. Some just needed room and silence, and the kind of man who didn't look at scars unless they needed braiding. Mercy woke in the blue hush of dawn, the fire still crackling low, Caleb snoring softly beneath the folds of the fur Talako had tucked around him the night before. The smoke curled upward, catching in the beams of morning light like the ghost of a dance. She lay still, watching the way it moved, thinking of nothing and everything. For the first time in years, her mind wasn't clawing at escape routes. There was no man to outguess, no larder to count down, no bruise to hide. Just warmth and breath, and a silence that didn't ask anything from her. Talako stood by the edge of the trees, brushing snow off a pile of cut wood, his movements steady, careful. He didn't know she was watching. That was what made it beautiful. He did everything the same whether anyone saw it or not. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the boy, and stepped out toward him. The cold bit at her ankles, but she didn't care. Talako didn't turn until she was only a few steps away. He gave her the same look he always did. Nothing performed, nothing withheld. Just presence. "I want to help today," she said softly. "More than gathering sticks, more than sorting roots." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Without a word, he handed her a second blade, worn smooth at the handle. She chopped beside him. At first, her arms shook with the unfamiliar weight, but she didn't stop. They worked in silence, the thud of wood splitting a rhythm between them. At one point, she looked up and caught him watching her, not evaluating, not instructing, just watching. And then she said it. Not planned, not rehearsed, just truth. "I've been waiting." Talako paused, axe resting against his knee. "For what?" he asked, his voice like gravel warmed by fire. "To feel like someone would let me stay," she said. "Not keep me, not trap me, just let me." He didn't answer right away. Then stop waiting." She set the axe down, breathing hard, not from work but from something deeper unraveling inside her. "You say so little," she said, "and still it feels like more than anyone's ever said to me." Talako took a step toward her. "You speak enough for both of us." She smiled. "You're not afraid I'll say the wrong thing?" "You've already said the truest thing I've ever heard," he said, "when you asked me to feed the child before beating you." Her smile faded, not from shame, but from the weight of that memory landing fully. "I was scared," she whispered, "but I said it anyway." "That's how I knew you were worth listening to." The quiet between them stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was full, like the sky before a storm that never comes. Then Talako reached into his coat and pulled out a strip of red cloth. What's that? Mercy asked. A braid tie, he said. You don't have to wear it, but you can. She reached out, took it. It was soft from age and warm from his body. You're not asking me to be yours? No, he said. I'm asking if I can be near you, when you decide who you are. Her breath hitched, not because of fear, because for the first time, someone wasn't waiting for her to become smaller. They were making space for her to become whole. She tucked the braid tie into her skirt pocket and said, Then let's finish stacking the wood. Talico smiled, barely, but real, and beside him, Mercy picked up another log, not to impress him, but to build something, because she wasn't waiting anymore. She was beginning. The wind changed that evening, not sharp like before, not howling, but alert, restless. Even the birds seemed to fall quiet. Mercy noticed it first when Talico stopped mid-step on his way to refill the water pot. His head turned slightly, eyes narrowing toward the ridgeline beyond the trees. Then came the sound. Hooves. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Mercy moved quickly, pulling Caleb into her arms and backing him into the lodge. Her heart beat too fast, her lungs clenching with old instincts. Hide, obey, don't speak unless asked. Talico didn't move. He stood by the fire, his arms at his sides, his stance tall. A minute passed, then 2. The horse emerged, its rider slumped slightly in the saddle, a long coat flapping in the breeze. The man was thin, gray-bearded, face hard with trail dust and silence. But his eyes were sharp. Dangerous, not from rage, but from calculation. Mercy's stomach turned. She knew that kind of man. She'd begged at the feet of that kind of man. He dismounted slowly, stiffly, and nodded at Talico. Didn't expect to find anyone out here, he said, voice low and flat. Much less a woman. Talico didn't answer. The man's gaze slid past him, landed on Mercy's shadow behind the doorway. She yours? He asked. Talico didn't move, didn't blink. The man chuckled. Didn't peg Apaches for charity work. Mercy stepped forward, just a little. Caleb clung to her skirt. She wanted to disappear, but something in Talico's stillness kept her grounded. We're not his, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He just helped us. The stranger tilted his head. Funny thing, I was tracking a woman and a child, said to have run off with a satchel from her employer. Thought they'd be halfway to the Brazos by now. Mercy's stomach dropped. She opened her mouth, but Talico raised a hand, gentle but firm. Then, finally, he spoke. No satchel here, just food and snow. That so? The man asked, stepping closer. Then maybe you won't mind me resting here a bit, sharing your fire. Talico didn't respond right away. Then he bent, picked up the ladle, and stirred the stew. Eat first, ask questions after. The man smirked, but took a seat. His eyes never left Mercy. She couldn't breathe, but Caleb clutched her braid and whispered, He's not like Talico. And for some reason, that made her brave. She stepped forward, keeping Caleb behind her. We didn't steal, she said. I left with nothing. Not even boots for my boy. The man shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe you've got something worth taking now. Talico's ladle hit the rim of the pot once, sharp and loud. The stranger looked up, and something passed between them. No words, just the kind of silence that hangs right before lightning. Then Talico said, Eat or ride? The man stared, then gave a small, joyless laugh. You Apaches always were better at staring than talking. But he took a bowl, ate slowly, said nothing else. When he finished, he stood, wiped his mouth with his sleeve, and said, Storm's coming. You'd do well to find real shelter. Then he rode off without looking back. Mercy didn't move until the hoofbeats faded. Then she dropped to her knees beside Caleb, holding him tight. Talako came over, crouched, and placed a second log on the fire. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. But he stayed. And that was louder than anything that man could have said. The night after the stranger left was colder than any yet. Not in temperature, but in tension. Mercy barely slept. She lay curled around Caleb, watching the shadows from the fire dance across the lodge walls, replaying the man's words. Maybe you've got something worth taking now. She hated how quickly her mind had understood him. He hadn't meant gold. He hadn't meant supplies. He'd meant her. The difference this time was, she didn't feel like something that could be taken. Not anymore. Not here. Not with Talako sleeping just outside, his body curved like a mountain around the flame, his knife resting beside his hip. Not drawn, just ready. At dawn, she stepped outside, pulling Caleb's blanket around her shoulders. Talako stood already, facing east as the sun touched the tops of the pines. He didn't turn. "He'll come back," Mercy said. Talako didn't speak, but she saw his hand flex once. He didn't get what he wanted. Men like that don't let go easy. Still no answer. Mercy stepped beside him. "I don't want you to protect me," she said. "Not like that. Not if it means you bleed for me." "Then let me teach you to protect yourself," he said, still not facing her. That silenced her. She hadn't expected an offer. She'd expected the usual. Stay behind. Keep quiet. Let the men handle it. She turned slowly to face him. "How?" He motioned to the fire. "Start there." She frowned. "The fire? You've been sitting beside it, eating from it, but you haven't tended it." She blinked, confused. "You want me to feed the fire?" "I want you to claim it." He stepped aside. Mercy hesitated, then stepped to the pit. The embers were low, waiting. She picked up a branch, hesitated, then placed it gently into the glowing heart. The flame caught fast, too fast, and flared. She stumbled back. Talako didn't move. "Again," he said. She reached for another stick, this one shorter, drier. She fed it slower. This time the fire grew steady, strong. "What does this have to do with protection?" she asked. "A fire fed in panic will burn uncontrolled," he said. "A fire ignored will die." She paused. Then, "And a fire tended?" Talako finally looked at her. "We'll never leave you cold." Mercy looked into the flames, her hands warming above them. "What if I don't know what to do when he comes back?" "Then do what the fire taught you." She turned to him. "You mean burn?" "No," he said softly. "Grow." The silence between them wasn't distant. It was deep, rooted. She sat beside the fire then, not to warm herself, but to care for it. She added another log, then arranged the stones more tightly. Talako crouched beside her, handed her a strip of salted meat. "Eat," he said. "Then I'll teach you how to track a man's footsteps by the way snow breaks under his boot." She smiled. "Is that part of the fire lesson too?" He shrugged. "Everything is." That afternoon, she followed him into the trees. He showed her how to move without sound, how to listen for breath in stillness, how to read the bend of a branch like a page. And that night, when they returned to camp, the fire was still burning, because she had tended it. And for the first time in her life, Mercy realized she wasn't afraid of being alone with her fear, because now she had something stronger than safety. She had skill, she had presence, and she had a fire that answered only to her hands. The next morning, Mercy spoke before Talako even rose. "I want to learn the knife today." Her voice didn't waver. The snow crunched beneath her bare boots. She hadn't bothered to wrap them yet, but her spine was straight. Talako lifted his head slowly, eyes narrowing, reading more than just her words. "The knife is not strength," he said. "It's last resort." "Then I want to know my last resort," she answered. Talako stood. He didn't smile, but there was something like approval in the way he handed her the small, bone-handled blade. "Show me how you'd hold it." She wrapped her fingers around it awkwardly, wrist stiff, knuckles white. He gently adjusted her grip, loosening her fingers, repositioning the blade to point along her forearm. "Here," he said, "it moves with you." Not against. They practiced in silence, motions slow, deliberate. She lunged, he corrected. She hesitated, he waited. And when Caleb laughed from the doorway, tossing snow into the air like feathers, she paused long enough to smile back. "He doesn't remember much of before," she said, panting. "Only the dark parts." Talako nodded. "Children know what to keep." Mercy looked down at the knife. "And what to forget?" She lowered it. "I never had a voice before," she said quietly. "Not one that mattered. Every time I spoke, it was either to beg or to apologize. Even my silence felt stolen." She looked up. "But now, it's like I have something to say, and I'm scared no one will hear it." Talako moved closer, kneeling before her in the snow. Not like a proposal, more like a grounding. His height matched hers now. His eyes met hers fully. "I hear you," he said, "even when you don't speak." Her throat clenched. "Why do you care?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Because I remember the first person who looked at me like I wasn't made of someone else's war." She didn't understand the full meaning, but her chest swelled at the shape of it. He stood, took the knife from her hand, and said, "Come. There's a tree I want you to meet." They hiked up a ridge, Caleb trailing behind, now more curious than cold. The tree was huge, twisted, its bark broken in places, its limbs heavy with old snow. "Lightning hit this trunk last year," Talako said. "Split it wide. Everyone thought it would die." He placed her hand on the exposed scar. "But look." Tiny buds had begun to form, new growth from the edges of the wound. "Things grow back stronger here," he said, "but not because they pretend the break didn't happen." Mercy nodded slowly, tears forming. "Then I don't want to pretend anymore." She stepped forward, arms around the trunk. "I was hurt," she said aloud to the tree, to the sky. "And I was told I had to earn the right to live." Her voice shook. "But I don't believe that anymore." Talako didn't interrupt, not once. And when she turned back toward him, face wet, voice ragged, she said the words she'd never been allowed to say, not to any man. "I want to stay, not out of debt, not out of fear, but from choice." Talako looked at her as if she were something rare, not delicate, but real. "Then stay," he said. "Not as someone I rescued." His hand touched his chest. "But as someone I see." That night she didn't sit beside the fire. She fed it, tended it, then sat opposite Talako, not across from him, but beside. Equal. And for the first time in her life, Mercy had no shame left to burn. Mercy woke before the frost had melted from the pine needles. Caleb was still sleeping, curled beside a deerskin pillow Talako had stitched with rabbit fur. The lodge smelled of cedar and smoke, soft and safe. Talako was already outside, gathering wood. But this time, when Mercy stepped out, she didn't hesitate. She didn't clutch her shawl like armor. She stood tall, her bare toes pressing into the frozen ground, her breath curling into the morning air like a prayer with weight. He didn't look up when she approached. She bent down beside him and placed her hands on a half-split log. He paused, watching her, then handed her the axe. No words, no test, just trust. She raised it and brought it down with enough force to crack the grain clean through. She blinked at the clean break. Talako nodded, calm as ever. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "No," she whispered. "I'm just not hiding anymore." Later that morning, as the sun warmed the clearing, Talako prepared a new stew, one with dried berries and herbs she couldn't name. Caleb sat nearby, carving shapes into the snow with a stick, his cheeks pink with laughter. Mercy watched them, one hand on her knee, the other resting lightly on her heart. "I used to think I was broken," she said softly, "because no one ever stayed, because every kindness had a price." Talako stirred the pot. "That's not broken," he said. "That's what they wanted you to believe." She looked at him. "And what do you believe?" He turned then, fully, and stepped closer. The steam of the pot swirled between them like a veil. "I believe you walked into the storm, carrying a boy, and still said, 'Feed him first.'" His eyes softened. "I believe no one who speaks like that should ever feel less than sacred." Mercy's breath caught. "Sacred?" she repeated, the word foreign on her tongue. Talako reached into the satchel at his side and pulled out a thin braid of rawhide. From it hung 3 small beads, one carved of bone, one of turquoise, and one painted red. "It's not a wedding token," he said, placing it in her hands. "Not a gift to bind you, just a marker, a sign that you've crossed through something and came out with your name intact." She closed her fingers around it. "I never had a name that meant anything," she said. "You do now," he answered. "You earned it." She looked down at the beads, her eyes filled. "What name?" He touched the center of her chest, just once. "One only you can speak, when you're ready." They didn't make vows. There was no ceremony, but that evening, as the sun fell behind the ridge, Talako lit the fire and moved aside. Mercy stepped forward. She knelt, not out of shame, but to feel the warmth for herself. She placed another log on the flame and sat beside it. Not just welcome, not just allowed. Home. And when Caleb curled against her and said, "Mama, can we stay?" she didn't look at Talako for permission. She answered herself, "Yes, baby. We're not just staying. We belong." The snow had softened by morning, turning the lodge's edge into a quiet field of white. Mercy stirred the pot with care, not because it needed it, but because her hands liked the rhythm. Outside, she could hear women laughing, gathering roots, naming things with words she didn't know. Each word sounded like water, flowing, connected, living. Talako entered quietly, carrying a fresh pelt. "You've been quiet today," he said. She nodded. "They name everything out there, even the wind." He knelt beside her. "Would you like a name?" "I don't want to take what's not mine." Talako looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his pouch and pulled out a tiny shell with a hole in the middle. "Come," he said simply. She followed him beyond the lodge, into a grove ringed with cedar and earth mounds. There were no torches or drums, just a few elders seated in silence. One nodded when Talako approached. Mercy stood in the center, barefoot in the snow, the cold kissing her ankles. "She's crossed fire," Talako said to them, "but she never asked for a new skin. She just kept walking." The eldest woman reached forward and dabbed her fingertip in crushed ochre. She touched Mercy's forehead. "Name yourself." Mercy swallowed. Her hands trembled. I never had a name that meant anything." "Then speak the one that does now," the woman said. Mercy looked down, then up at Caleb, who'd followed and now stood holding her shawl. "I fed the fire," she whispered, "when I had nothing else." The elder raised her chin. Then say it aloud. She took a breath. I am she who fed the fire. The words didn't ring with thunder. They didn't spark magic. But Caleb smiled wide and said, That's my mama's name. Talako placed the tiny shell in her palm and closed her fingers around it. We don't name people to define them, he said. We name them to remember who they already chose to be. Back at the lodge, Mercy sat beside the pot, beads dangling from her neck. She touched the new shell beside them and whispered it again, this time like it belonged to her. She who fed the fire, and the wind outside paused, just long enough to hear her. 2 seasons later, the world around Red Hollow had changed, though Mercy still woke to the same rhythm of smoke curling from the fire and Caleb's soft breathing beside her. The lodge no longer felt like borrowed space. It had the weight of something earned, with baskets she had woven herself and blankets stitched with her own hands. Caleb had grown stronger, his laughter quick, his legs steady as he ran between the trees with Talako's younger cousins. That morning, a storm blew in from the north, heavy with snow, and Mercy was stirring stew when she heard the sound of frantic footsteps. She opened the flap to find a young woman standing barefoot in the snow, clutching a crying boy, her face streaked with tears and windburn. Mercy saw herself, the way she had first appeared here, broken, apologizing for her existence. Without a word, she stepped aside and guided the woman to the fire, placing the boy in her lap. Please, just feed him, the girl whispered, her voice trembling. You can hurt me after if you want. Mercy knelt so fast her knees touched the earth. No one will hurt you here, she said, voice firm, calm. Talako had entered behind them, his presence quiet but grounding. He handed Mercy a ladle, and together they fed the child spoon by spoon until his crying faded. The young woman's eyes stayed wide with disbelief, and Mercy placed a hand on her shoulder. You're safe, she said. Stay as long as you need. You belong to no one's shadow anymore. When the woman's tears finally came, Mercy pulled her close, as Shuya had once done for her. Caleb watched, proud, understanding something bigger than words. Later, Talako stepped outside with Mercy as the snow thickened, his dark hair brushing her shoulder. He didn't speak, but his eyes carried the question he never asked aloud. Are you ready to make this your forever home? Mercy reached for his hand, fingers lacing with his, and looked at the fire glowing through the lodge's opening. This place saved me, she said, but now it's mine to save for others. Talako nodded, his silence more powerful than any vow. That evening, Mercy tied the braid of rawhide and beads above the fire, adding the small shell she had named herself with. It was no ceremony, no announcement, but the tribe gathered anyway, their presence like quiet wind around her. Caleb leaned against her side and whispered, Mama, does this mean we're staying forever? Mercy smiled, feeling the warmth of the fire on her face and the steady presence of Talako beside her. Yes, baby, she said, her voice steady. The fire waited for us, and now we'll make sure it never goes out. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had seen her ask, feed him first, before even saving herself, would you have stepped in too? Tell us in the comments.